It's early March and we're off into the woods to get some wild garlic. This is my go-to spot for wild garlic and a few other things. It's a little bit of a trek to get here, but it's well worth it. Now, before we go gaily picking wild garlic, there are a few things we should probably talk about with regard to safety. And I'm going to labour this point a little bit more than I typically do, because I had some interesting encounters just recently. I happened to participate in a Reddit thread where somebody said, I picked some wild garlic and now I feel sick. Unfortunately, the thread's been deleted now, but there were photographs of what this lady had picked and eaten, and it wasn't wild garlic. Now, this is somebody who picked it from a location they picked before. They said, I picked it from the same place I already picked it last year, the place I always pick it. And they picked what they thought was wild garlic. I think some of it was wild garlic, but they'd also picked bluebells, or the foliage of bluebells, and possibly spring snowflake, or maybe something else in the amaryllis family, in the daffodil family. And they'd made this into a pesto and eaten it and vomited and felt very, very ill. And they were asking for advice on Reddit. I think the people generally on Reddit are very well-meaning, but there was a piece of rather bad advice on that, or I think it's bad advice, which was to visit a Facebook group where they'll help you identify poisons, saying, well, don't go to the hospital until you know what it is you've eaten, because doctors aren't very good at identifying that sort of thing. I think that's not very good advice. My advice, I think, would be, if you think you've been poisoned, get to a hospital as soon as possible. Ideally, if you can take some of the thing that you ate with you, that's great, but the hospital is the place where they can deal with your situation and stabilize you, and they probably have protocols for unknown poisons as well. So I don't think there is a sound argument for waiting for somebody else to identify what it is you ate before you get yourself to a hospital. So here's the thing that people might pick by accident and poison themselves with. So here we go, wild arum. You're not likely to eat very much of that because eating it creates a burning sensation in your mouth. But if you manage to mix that with other things to the extent that you didn't notice what it was you were eating, perhaps if you put it with lots of spicy things so you didn't really notice the burning sensation in your mouth, that would make you really ill. It contains oxalic acid and it's pretty toxic. And that's around at this time of year. In fact, this is the major point I want to make here, which is that at this time of year, early spring, most of the things that are in active growth are toxic. And that's because they don't want to be eaten. And so even the wild garlic, which is not toxic to us, the fact that it has a pungent aroma is a defense mechanism to try to not be eaten. And so, as I say, a lot of the plants that you'll find in active growth at this time of year are toxic. And we're going to have a look at a few of those today, including one or two of the plants I think were in this person's basket who foraged what they thought was wild garlic. And then later in the video, we are actually going to pick some wild garlic and take it home and cook with it. But there is some general purpose advice for picking wild garlic as well in this video. So the plant we're going to be looking for today is Allium ursinum, which is the broad-leafed wild garlic that you get in the UK and most of Northern Europe. There is a similar species that grows in North America called Ramps, Different species, but quite similar in appearance. The one here is Allium ursinum. We call it Ramsons here, or bear leek I think it's called in some parts of northern Europe, and it grows in shady woods, mostly sort of damp shady woods. Unfortunately, other things that like to grow in damp shady woods are bluebells, which are toxic, daffodils, which are toxic, snowdrops, which are toxic. Are you getting the general pattern here? I can actually see some of the wild garlic over there. This is not where I'm going to pick it from though. I'm going to find a patch that's a little bit more filled out than this, but there we go. There's a little patch of very early Ramsons wild garlic. One of the things that's really very easy to mistake this for, or mistake for this, is lily of the valley, which has very similar shaped leaves. And again, there's a thing that likes growing in shady woods. I don't find lily of the valley growing wild here, so that isn't a risk in this particular locality. I don't think I've ever actually seen lily of the valley growing in large amounts in the wild in the UK. But if you're in a place where that does grow abundantly, then obviously that's a particular risk. So we've got to go down this rather muddy track, but we'll get past the mud. So here's a thing that, now if you're picking three-cornered leek, for example, this is a thing that might look a bit like it. These are bluebells. This is the foliage of bluebells, and this is one of the things I think that person on Reddit had, judging only by the shape of the leaves. And it's not a very reliable thing to try to identify things from a single photo, but to my eye it did look like they had something other than, well, they certainly had other things other than Ramsons in the basket. They thought they had Ramsons and few-flowered leek, which is another invasive thing, a bit like three-cornered leek. But all of this foliage here, all this greenery here, most of it anyway, is the foliage of bluebells, English bluebells. Beautiful spring plant, but you can't eat it. Well, you can eat it once. Anyway, that's not what we're here to pick. But it will be found growing together because they like the same kind of habitats. So this bank here happens to be nearly all bluebells, but other places will find them growing together. And so right here we've got some more wild arum, and the very young leaves of wild arum, we'll have a look at the differences in the leaves between wild arum and Ramsons in a minute, but the very young, firstly emerged leaves of wild arum could be mistaken for Ramsons. They are still a different shape, but if you're not quite paying attention, they could be mistaken. Here's a really young one, for example. So that there I think is Ramsons. That is wild arum, and it's still rolled up, but wild arum has these two backward pointing spurs on the bottom of the leaves, making it look a bit like an arrowhead shape, the leaf. So that's wild arum. You can't eat that. That's one of the leaves there that's rolled up though, so you know, if you found Ramsons and this stuff growing together and you're just grabbing handfuls of things, you could very easily pull up a piece of this plant and poison yourself with it. And so it's very important to be mindful of what you're picking and mindful of every single thing you pick. Now, one of the things people very commonly say is, well, yeah, don't eat anything unless you're sure what it is. But this person on Reddit, by the way, they're okay. They did recover from the incident. I don't think they ate enough to poison themselves fatally, fortunately. But this person was sure that what they were picking was wild garlic because they picked it there for years and years previously. What they weren't doing was exercising sufficient care, and so they were just assuming that what they were picking was a thing they knew and grabbing handfuls of it and putting it in a basket. Now there is the smell test with wild garlic. So unlike daffodils, snowdrops, wild arum, bluebells, wild garlic smells strongly of garlic when the leaves are cut or pulled or bruised. So that's one way that you can identify the plant. However, if you're just wading in there and grabbing handfuls of things and putting them in your basket, very early on in that process your hands will start to stink of garlic, which is fine, except that then anything that you pick up and lift to your face to take a sniff of is going to smell of garlic, regardless of whether it is garlic or not. And so the smell test is good if if it's the first specimen you find and you want to be sure it's the thing you think it is. That's a good way to round out the kind of general identification. But if you're not sure what it is, especially if you're just grabbing handfuls of stuff, you can make a mistake in thinking something is garlic just because your hands stink of the stuff. A tree down. Okay, well, we can probably step around this. Right. So down here there is a patch of Ramsons I've picked from before. But just because I picked here before doesn't mean I'm going to get careless. I am still going to carefully look at the things I'm picking and make sure that I'm very sure that every single leaf I pick is the right thing. So this patch here I happen to know is Ramsons. This is all wild garlic here. It's a little bit early to be picking it. Actually, it's not very well developed here because we're on the shady side of a hill. So I might look for a slightly sunnier spot and go for some slightly more developed leaves. This is a little microclimate. It's probably a little bit colder than other places. And so development on those plants is just ever so slightly retarded. So if we get down here, I can see some sunshine down here, and I think we'll find the development is a little bit advanced compared to what we just saw there. Anyway, I'm sorry if I just seem to have laboured that safety point a bit, but there's a really significant risk of people poisoning themselves by doing a thing they think is safe and doing it without sufficient care. So yeah, this little hillside here is all Ramsons as well. Most of the green you can see here is the young foliage of Ramsons, and you can see when it's at this very young stage, this would be actually quite easy to make a silly mistake and just grab something that isn't what you think it is. So here's something that's a bit further along. It is still very early in the season, but this stuff will be just great. Now it's interesting that it's growing next to the tree here. It's growing really quite vigorously, and it's bigger than the stuff that's not by the tree. Isn't that interesting? You'd think that it would be competing for nutrients, but the opposite seems to be true. Anyway, I'm going to have some of this. The idea is to fill my basket today, and we're going to try to make some green garlic butter. Oh, this is interesting. A tree has fallen, but the location of that tree was originally over there. So it's fallen, and then when the top of the tree has hit that other thing up there, the bottom of the tree has slid out across the path. I can see cramp ball fungus, or King Alfred's cakes, halfway up the trunk there. Not an edible fungus, but commonly found on ash. This is mostly ash, this forest. And those little black fungal bodies can be dried out and used as tinder for lighting fires. That's the thing I should try sometime. Here are some of them on a fallen log, on a felled log. So yeah, those fungal bodies there, like I say, not edible, but if you collect those and dry them out, they're very good for receiving an ember and keeping it smouldering. Perhaps that's a thing we'll try at some point. I I think it would be interesting actually to just try a variety of different traditional fire lighting methods. I've done flint and steel. I've done a kind of bow and drill fire lighting before, never with any great success. I managed to get smoke, but I didn't manage to actually get an ember that I could kindle into a flame. But maybe that's the thing I should try. So another little microclimate here where we've got a quite productive spot, still very early on. Now I'm not going to go into the huge detail of how to identify Ramsons. That is taken care of in a separate video, which I'll link to in this card and in the video description. But this is the plant we're looking at, broadleaf garlic. It has very simple spear-shaped leaves without that backward facing notch that you get on wild arum. It's in leaf from really the end of February onwards down here in the south of England. The leaves will just get larger, and there are some flower buds here. There's a flower bud, I don't know if you can see it, there's one just emerging down there. And the entire plant has a strong smell of fresh garlic, especially when it's bruised, but sometimes just walking past it you'll smell it. Anyway, I'm going to pick some more of this and then we'll get it home and cook something with it. So, beautiful big full basket of very fresh, very young wild garlic. I don't think I've ever picked it quite this early in the season, but listen to these leaves. Got a kind of squeak to them. So I want to preserve this for use throughout the year. Normally I would do that by pickling it, but this time I think I'm going to make green garlic butter and freeze it in little portions. First thing I've got to do is rinse all of this, give it a good rinse, make sure there's no snails in there. There doesn't seem to be very much dirt on it because it's so young and fresh. The leaves haven't been there long, but I'll give it a wash anyway, inspect all the leaves, make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be in there, and then we'll carry on making green garlic butter. So I've just given the sink a really good scrub round, and I'm going to wash it directly in there. All my wild garlic leaves are just going to go straight in there like that, because I want to give these a good plunge and swill around. I suppose I could do this in a, if I had a new plastic bucket or something like that, but I gave the sink a really good excuse to have a good clean of the sink. Probably slightly more important than usual to be washing this, because I am going to be eating this raw potentially. It's going to have been frozen and then thawed, but some of this green garlic butter might go on, for example, a baked potato, and so we are going to be eating some of this without cooking it. So slightly more important than usual to be giving it a thorough wash. So I'm going to give it a good swill around in cold water there, actually really cold water. My hands are now like blocks of ice. And then we'll pull it out of there into a colander to let it drain. But it's very, very clean, this stuff, because we're so early in the year. There's no soil splash on it. Doesn't seem to be any foreign bodies. We've got one or two little flower buds. They'll all get used as well. They're all edible. The whole plant is edible. And then this is just going to come out into a colander. And allow to drain. I'll let that drip dry. Give it a shake. Get all the water off it before we try to make something out of it. Alright, so there we are. Washed, mostly drained. And we're going to make green garlic butter, and this really couldn't be simpler. I've just got a couple of blocks of butter here from the supermarket. 500 grams in total. I left these out the fridge for a little while so that they would soften up, but they haven't softened that much. I think they'll be okay though. And we're going to just chop this garlic up in the food processor. But I'm not going to put it in like that because that will tend to wrap around the blades. So, got the jug for the food processor here. I'm just going to grab some handfuls of this stuff. Actually, I might just take that over to the sink and squeeze it to wring out some more of the water. Well, there wasn't actually much to come out. And now, I'm just going to snip that in there with scissors. Just cutting it into rough sections, just so that we're not ending up with long fibrous pieces that will wrap around the blade of the food processor. I'll wrap around the spindle. Now, I have remarked in the past upon how this garlic smells really pungent when it's fresh and actually tastes really mild when it's cooked. And a few people have commented on that, and they're right, that part of the reason for that is because I don't tend to chop it much more finely than this when I'm cooking with it. And the pungency of garlic and onions is significantly related to tissue damage. So the reason these plants make these garlicky, oniony smells is to try to deter animals from eating them. And so when the tissues of the plant are broken or damaged, there's an enzymatic reaction that creates these sulfur compounds that are the pungent garlic and onion aromas. So if you don't cut it up much, you don't get a lot of that pungent flavour, and the enzymes are destroyed by cooking. So once you've cooked it, it's not going to get any more oniony. I think that's probably why baked onions, if you bake onions whole, it's a completely different vegetable to if you chop it up and fry it. But also with this wild garlic, obviously if I'm just chopping it into pieces like this, that's a lot of undamaged tissue there. We're not doing that today though. We're going to blitz this down to pretty much a puree, and then we're going to add in butter, and hopefully it will emulsify into a paste that I can make into little portions. That's the theory anyway. I think that might be enough for now. Right, here we go. That's now finely chopped, and now I'm going to add in the butter. So I'll use half of my butter, and we'll see what 250 grams goes in like. Cutting it into pieces just really to assist the process of it blending together. Pretty good. And so it's still more garlic than butter, I think, in there. So I'm going to add some more butter. Now, I haven't weighed anything here, which is a bit of a shame, because if you wanted to replicate this recipe exactly, you can't. So apologies for that. But I suppose the thing to do is start off with more butter and more garlic than you need. Add more of one or the other until you get to the result you want. That's what I'm doing. I will know how much butter I've used at the end of this, but I won't know how much garlic I put in there, except to say that it was kind of like half of my basket full, which is, I would estimate, we're talking about probably 300 grams of those garlic leaves. So that's the other half, that's half of the other block of butter. So now we've got 375 grams of butter in there. Right, I think that's good enough. So now I've got a big mushy food processor full of lovely garlic butter, very garlic butter. But we've got to find some way of portioning that out. So big old non-stick metal tray, garlic butter mixture, 2 identical teaspoons. I feel like I'm probably the only person that needs to mention identical teaspoons, because mine are all different. But if you've got an assortment of teaspoons, you need to pick 2 that are at least similar. And we're going to just take portions of this mixture. We just kind of pass it from the one spoon to the other, like this. And just shape that little quenelle of garlic butter like that. And then that's going to go onto the tray and repeat until the tray is full of little portions like that. So yeah, you take a kind of heaped teaspoonful of the mixture and then just rotating the spoons a bit like this. It's a bit difficult actually because this is setting as we speak. But anyway, just a heaped teaspoonful of the mixture like that, and then pass it between the spoons like this. There's juice coming out of it, garlic juice coming out of it as we go, and then onto the tray. Or any other method that gets you portion sizes that you're happy with. So you could just roll this into a great big tube, roll it up in a piece of plastic, and then slice it. You could push it into ice cube trays and then pop them out. And if the whole quenelling thing is a bit too fancy, what you could do is just get 2 spoons and press them together like that, and then kind of just trim off those edge bits, and there's your little portion just there. Slightly smaller than a quenelle, but just use 2 of them. Right, I'm going to turn the camera off because it's in my way. Right, there we go. My quenelles are not going to win me that extra Michelin star, but good enough. These are portion-sized pieces. This tray will just go in the freezer now, exactly as it is, just like that. As soon as those are frozen solid, and just give the tray a little flex, they'll pop off, and then I can store them loose in a bag, or a tub, or something else. The rest of the wild garlic that I picked today, I'm also going to freeze. So I'm just going to shred it into this box here and freeze it as little chopped pieces, and hopefully I'll be able to chisel out a little bit of that. Strictly speaking, with green vegetables like this, you should blanch them before you freeze them, which means dipping them briefly into boiling water. I'm just going to risk it with this because this is essentially like big chives. And I don't blanch chives when I freeze them. We're going to take a gamble with this. But yeah, hopefully I'll just be able to pull out a handful of this and throw it into a soup or a stew or a curry or anything like that that we're making. And just have it as a kind of vegetable and a seasoning, but already chopped. Anyway, that's the idea. That's going to get frozen as well. A couple of hours later, these are all now frozen completely solid. I'm just going to store them in this plastic tub. I think it's about the right size. Oh, what about that? Perfect fit. Plastic tub will contain odours better than a plastic bag would. And I'm just going to label that. That can go back in the freezer and we can use those one at a time. Okay. I'm going to use a bit of this frozen wild garlic. It seems to have frozen okay, and it's not difficult to pull out a little portion like that. I think I am going to chop this a little bit smaller, just for the usage I have in mind this morning. When it's still frozen like this, actually it's really, really easy to chop. I think that's about right. Okay, so I've got some wild garlic, I've got a handful of grated cheese. I'm going to make an omelette. 3 eggs, a little bit of black pepper. Right, over to the cooker. A little bit of olive oil, tiny bit of butter, just because I really like this flavour combination, olive oil, butter and eggs. Right, turning down the heat on that. In with my eggs, in with my wild garlic. And just give that a little shimmy around to get it combined, but stop before the egg set completely. Cheese kind of across the middle like that. Okay, and cooking this really gently, because although I'm not going for the kind of perfect Jacques Pepin French omelette, I don't mind a little bit of crispiness on the outside, but I do like the eggs to be still quite tender. Yeah, we'll cook this on kind of half heat. Just giving it a little jiggle now and again, just to gauge the extent to which the eggs are set. And I'll probably make a last job of actually folding this omelette, because I often do. I think this pan is probably better suited to a 2-egg omelette, and this is a 3-egg omelette, which may not fold perfectly. Or maybe it will. Not bad. Oh yeah, not bad. So I'm actually going to turn the heat off now. There is a little bit of browning on here, so this is not your classic blonde French omelette, but I don't want it crispy. But I don't mind a little bit of just ever such light browning. Okay, so there we go. Now, if I've done this right, the inside of the omelette should be moist. It should be like a sauce. It is cooked. This is a mixture of slightly soft egg and cheese, of course. So the egg and the cheese combine to make a really delicate sauce. And that wild garlic is just amazing in there. The flavour is a curious juxtaposition of delicate and pungent. It does just need a tiny little bit of salt. Not much, because that cheese was mature cheddar, which is quite salty. But there we go. Now, of course, if you like your omelettes a bit more done than this, then more power to you. Knowing what you like is important. But actually, for me, that is pretty much spot on for an omelette. So the flavour of the wild garlic here is somewhere between garlic and chives. Curiously mild, but also pungent at the same time. It's really quite an elusive flavour, but it's incredibly good. And it tastes so fresh. Well, that was a pretty fine breakfast and a lovely first taste of Ramsons this year. Now, I also want to just test drive this garlic butter. So, baked potatoes, piping hot, straight out of the oven. And I have it on good authority. This is how Ridley Scott opens his baked potatoes. And then just one of these pieces of garlic butter. We'll have a medium-sized bit. I'm just going to put that in the middle there. And that potato is far too hot to eat right now, so I'm just going to let that melt there in the potato while I get the other things on the table. That's had about 5 minutes to just sit. So let's have a look and see what's going on inside of here now. Yep, it's completely melted. Garlicky, buttery, potatoey goodness. There are other things to go on the plate, but I just thought I'd taste this a bit first. So the flavour of Ramsons here, I mean, bearing in mind this is just frozen, it's not cooked. It's like garlic flavoured spring onions. So although that is a more pungent flavour than this Ramsons has been in other dishes I've cooked it in, it's still quite a gentle flavour. Punchy, but far less pungent than the same amount of regular garlic. So I'm calling that a success. I hope this has been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.